Amy Poehler. I know the one and only Ron Howard brought this to you. So how did this all go down?
Yeah, Imagine, the great Imagine, and Ron and Whitehorse approached me about this idea. And I was so thrilled, first of all, that they had thought of me for this project, but also because I was very scared. And that's a good sign for me, usually, that it's something I should try.
Mhm. I've read some interviews with you, and you've said like you kind of your angle into this was that you wanted to make them more 3D, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, because you feel like they've been too just like lionized as these like mythic creatures. And I think you really avoided the film becoming this like hagiography of them, with this backbone of their relationship from like how they met and all the way through their divorce and then until like they both died. So how did you land on centralizing the through line like on the relationship like that?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think that was, I have in the doc space, there's often this obligation or assignment to take people into a world that they don't know and to tell them about people that they should know. And we had the opposite problem with Lucy and Desi. How do we make these iconic, larger than life, incredibly famous people seem like human beings, which they are. They're, mothers and fathers and lovers and friends. So we kind of had to work from that, which was how do we connect with them as people? And I think, the way to connect with a lot of people's stories is to see um, in what way they choose to love. So the love story of Lucy and Desi became the framing element for the film. And, their actual love story is kind of a 3-act structure. So we used that to try to shape the film and also just to keep us interested, even if you knew nothing really about their work or, we really wanted to make a love story.
For sure. And the film, I think it's so effective because you have these audio tapes from them themselves. I think for Desi is the audiobook for his memoir, and for Lucille, I think she did like a really lengthy interview, right? And those are just like audio tapes left over.
Yeah, we stumbled across this incredible treasure trove. Lucille Ball had done a long interview with Betty Hoffman, a writer at Ladies Home Journal, and that became an interview that she enjoyed the experience so much that she started working with Betty about a possible book. And so all of the stuff we heard was very raw, unedited stuff of her talking to Betty with the hopes that it would someday, be put into a book. So and then Desi had recorded his own audiobook, but we also found a lot of found audio. And when I say we found, Lucy Arnaz Luckinbill, Lucy and Desi's daughter, who is an incredible protector of the estate, opened her doors for us, literally, and they found this very special box of stuff that had been tucked away. So once we got Desi and Lucy's voice in the film, it changed the way I think how we feel about the film, because we really want Lucy and Desi to feel present, alive, and of this moment, because they certainly are.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I love one of the quotes from one of the talking heads you have in there, Laura LaPlaca from the National Comedy Center, I believe. And she said that she
Mhm.
hates when people call Lucy's comedy or her work effortless because she worked hard at it. And I loved it so much because it really dispels this notion that she could do this in her sleep. And she's always talked about like how she doesn't think she's naturally funny, but I think it was also a very keen point because in the way it applies to like a lot of successful women, like people think things come easily to them. And I think maybe also in comedy as well. Did you see those parallels there when she said that?
Yeah, I think comedy and in some ways music are two disciplines that people, if done right, looks easy. So people can watch good comedy or they can watch great music and they can sit down at a piano and be like, I'm going to do this, or they can try. and it's not easy. And, I think Lucy really took great pride in how hard she worked. Her love language was acts of service, and she really, she did things for people, and the doing and the action was like the way she operated her life. And she worked really, really hard. She studied. She did not consider herself a natural comedian. She came to comedy by way of acting. And so she studied with the greatest. She studied with Buster Keaton and, Red Buttons. And she took, she followed every director and actress around that she worked with. And she cared very much about rehearsal. And so I think that point is to say that although Lucille Ball has incredible gifts, she took her job very seriously and she worked really hard. And as did Desi, but interestingly enough, Desi was much more of the natural, less, he wasn't as interested in rehearsal. He wasn't as interested in running it over and over again. So they both approached work in very, very different ways.
Mm-hmm. I also love that you really give Desi his due, because I think sometimes he's overlooked in the I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball of it all. But he really transformed the way television is made, that, a lot of innovations that we still use today. So what was it like finding the right elements in his very long and successful and also unconventional life, and what to put into the documentary, like starting from his life in Cuba and coming over here?
Yeah, well, what Desi and Lucy shared was, a woman and a Cuban American, man of color in the 1950s was not allowed to be part of the room. They weren't in the room making decisions. So they were both certainly outsiders, outliers. But Desi's story is a really amazing one. It is a story of lots of early childhood trauma, which is a word that generation not only didn't use, but didn't know about. But it's also a very truly American story. It's an immigrant story of a kid who gets here at 13, having been, chased literally out of his country, a country that he misses desperately when he lives in the US. But he becomes this self-made, incredible story of capitalism and success. And all the while, he is straddling a very, two very separate identities. And, we spoke to so many young people who were, really wanted to underline the fact how important it was to see a high status Cuban man on TV, elegantly dressed, in charge. Yes, with an accent, but never one that was made fun of or belittled. Just his status alone on TV was so groundbreaking. And the fact that him and Lucy were married on TV as well as in real life was incredibly groundbreaking at the time, and people forget about that. So yeah, we really wanted to make sure that Desi's story was told, because it is often the story that people don't know enough about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also like that you guys reminded everyone that I Love Lucy only lasted 5 seasons, but it feels like it went on for like 20 years. And I also, like, to your point before about like the 3-act structure, I think you could have ended the film when the show ended, but you go on and you show like how they still had this loving relationship after the divorce. So what do you think is the eternal appeal, enduring appeal of the show and of them?
Well, what's interesting is, we were not making a documentary about I Love Lucy. So we were really interested in those 25, 30 years after the show ended almost, where not only were Desi and Lucy still connected and in relationship, even though they had moved on to new relationships, but Lucy was still working. I mean, Lucy was working. She was on 3 TV shows after I Love Lucy, and in the public eye. And, whether it's, doing stuff with Carol Burnett on her show, or, the many sitcoms she did after. So that 3rd act, I think, is where a lot of discovery comes from, because when we fall in love with people people on television, we think when we turn off the television that those people don't exist. And when people leave TV shows, we think they've just kind of jumped off a proverbial cliff. Like, but Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, the producers, went on to build the careers of so many people, to produce so many shows, and to continue to work. And I think that, you know, not only is their story a story about, frankly, the American dream, and also a story about meeting the right person at the right time, but they're both a story about longevity, that, you know, that there's really no age that is the time where you're supposed to stop making art. And I think Lucy especially dug in her heels and proved that by example.
Yeah,
And, you know,
I agree.
Lucy did things, she didn't say things. So she didn't tell people that's what she was doing, she just did it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's more effective anyway.
I agree.